Well, good afternoon. I guess here we are on Wednesday, November 6th. And I think we thought that either the Democrats or the Republicans would be in control of the Minnesota House of Representatives after the election. It looks like when we flipped that coin, the quarter landed on its side, and we appear to be tied, 67-67. So I would just echo a lot of the things that Leader Damas said. I think that there will be an opportunity for us to show Minnesotans some good bipartisan working together and getting things done. Minnesotans certainly sent us a tied Minnesota House. So what they are asking us to do is to work together and be productive. And we are fully prepared to do that. We had great experience doing that when the Minnesota Senate was governed by Republicans. I have a great relationship with Senator Paul Gazelka. I think we, with Governor Walz, were able to get some good things done. And I look forward to having that kind of a relationship with Leader Damas. And I will say that we, I think at this point in time, have a great friendship and working relationship to build on. And I'm looking forward to talking in the next few days to figure out how this plays out. You know, we've been looking all around the country. There's certainly many jurisdictions that have had a tied legislature, so there's many different models. The model that the Minnesota legislature adopted, the Minnesota House adopted in '79 seems a bit archaic, seems like it's not really a fit for modern times. It's the only precedent we have in Minnesota, so certainly everybody's looking at that. But I think when we look at some of the other states, we see some configurations that might be more practical. So again, we haven't decided anything. We've had a very, very brief conversation, and I look forward to talking to Leader Damas more.
We saw at the end of last session, sorry, were you going to speak? Okay. We saw at the end of last session how much directional power the speaker can have at the end of the session. What does a power share agreement on speaker look like? How can we balance that between the tied legislature?
Well, I think one really good thing about having a power sharing agreement is you wouldn't have that kind of dynamic on the floor where one party lays down on the railroad tracks and another party feels like that they have to go to extraordinary means to pass bills. So everything would have to be pre-negotiated before it got to the floor, because there's really no sense in going to the floor and having a long debate and tying 67-67. I would anticipate that both parties think that there are some things about the rules and the processes of the House that could be improved, and maybe this is an opportunity to modernize our rules. We have a finite system that we put infinite inputs into. 5,000 bills is way too many bills. You know, hundreds of amendments in each floor debate is too many. Most legislatures around the country don't debate for hours ad nauseum. And so there might be some process improvements that are good for all the human beings who work in this building and not just the members.
What about the number, having an even number? It wasn't always that way. It was recalibrated, I believe, at one point. Are you interested in that? Would it be a constitutional amendment to get back to an odd number so this doesn't happen again?
So interesting that you would ask that question. So apparently the legislature drew 135 House districts in the 1970 redistricting, and the court said we can't have 3 nested in a Senate district when the rest of them have 2 nested. And the court said there will never be a tie. That's just a 1 in a million thing, it just won't happen. And then it happened just a few years later. So I do think probably one of the things we'll talk about is whether does it make sense to go to the 135 model that obviously somebody thought of in the 1970s.
And is that a constitutional question then, or could you do it through rules or some other lesser means?
It is a statutory number to have the number of districts. One court tried to make it 50 and 100, and that was struck down as like not being within their power. It's the legislature's power, and it is by statute.
Speaker Hortman, what happened in the 3 districts that the DFL lost? Why couldn't you hold on to those?
So we've seen a geographic realignment across the world and across the country and in Minnesota, where our rural areas are becoming increasingly red and our metro and suburban areas are becoming increasingly blue. And we see that this trend has really accelerated in the years that Trump has been on the ballot. In 2016, the Minnesota House DFL lost Greater Minnesota seats. In 2020, we lost more Greater Minnesota seats. And in 2024, we knew that those 4 seats that were in Greater Minnesota would be the toughest battle. And we knew these trend lines. We know those districts have been moving away a point or two a cycle over the last 4 cycles. So I think it's the geographic realignment of where people choose to live and how the partisan divide is reflected in those communities.
How does that explain the two St. Croix River districts, which are suburban, close to being suburban? Shouldn't you have won those then if that's realigning?
Well, this was really also a Republican wave election, right? I don't think many of us foresaw that. It maybe felt that way. And then we saw the Survey USA poll from Minnesota. We saw the Iowa poll. We started to think, well, is there something different going on? But when you look at the results across the country, you see that this was a Republican wave election and that Republicans did very well across the country and across many states. So I think when you try to flip a seat from Republican to Democrat in a year that's trending Republican, that's a tall order.
I apologize if this has been asked before, but there's a really detailed account of what happened in 1979, and it starts out really well, and then it all falls apart, and people are yelling at each other, there are walkouts, it's just a mess. And do you think you can sustain this?
Well, I think we've all been there and done that before, and we don't want to do it again. So I think that there's a lot of goodwill at this point. I think it will be difficult. You know, when I think about the years that Senator Gazelka and I worked together, the years that Senator Miller and I worked together, there's certainly very difficult times, but what makes it work is if people respect each other and have a fundamental decency of like places they won't go. If people keep their word. I think that the responsibility of the Minnesota legislature is to set a 2-year budget. And I think that we should be able to set a bipartisan 2-year budget without having those kind of histrionics. The other thing that was different about that 1979 agreement is very clearly the parties were playing against each other to try to get advantage. I think in particular the Democrats were trying to play the Republicans for a negotiated agreement that would ultimately give them an advantage. If we're looking at true power sharing and true equality in power, then there shouldn't be a need for that kind of conduct to occur in the House.
Do you think committees?
This is the kind of thing that all surveys say voters really want. I mean, is this do you see this as a good thing? I mean, that this is something that could really work out and change the tone and tenor of what happens here?
We would prefer to have the majority, and I know the Republicans would prefer to have the majority, but it is a golden opportunity to show people that we can get along and we can get things done.
Would you foresee equal representation on committee? That happened last time. Is that inevitable under this?
Well, I think as Leader Damas said, that any particular details of a power sharing agreement, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface yet. Both caucuses have to elect their leadership. We meet on Thursday evening, the Republicans meet on Friday morning, and then after that, there will be designated people to have conversations about what a power sharing agreement could look like.
And do you agree that there can't
Your
be
caucus's
two
leader?
speakers? Did you hear Damas earlier say there can't be two speakers? Are you in agreement on that?
It's very early. We just found this out, so we're still learning a lot about history and the Constitution and the statutes, and we'll have to see what sort of creative solutions we can come up with.
Are you seeking to retain your post as the head of the caucus?
Yes.
Do you see recounting changing the tie result at all?
I do not. It's very, very rare for a recount to change the results of a legislative election, and the kinds of margins that we're talking about are generally outside the range of what's reversed, but we'll let that happen. I know that there's the candidate in one of the races has indicated that she will request a recount. I haven't heard about the other one. I would anticipate that he would as well.
Looking back, do you wish you had figured out the ERA? Like if you had put an abortion measure on the ballot, would you be standing here with the majority right now?
No, we didn't have agreement on the language with the Senate, and I think when you're talking about changing your state's constitution, you have to be pretty clear that you know exactly what you're doing, and that the language that you're putting in front of the voters allows them a clear choice and not an ambiguous choice. And we weren't able to come to an agreement of what that question would look like.
A decade ago, when Republicans lost control of the legislature and the last DFL controlled government, overreach was cited, that Republicans lost because of overreach. Do you think Democrats lost because of overreach or tied because of overreach?
I expect that Minnesotans, when they vote, expect their legislators to do something. And so in 2022, when they elected a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic governorship, what they told us they wanted us to do is finally do some common sense gun violence prevention measures. You know, we've been talking about the red flag law and whether that should be actually used more and prevent more harm. It's already being used in Minnesota. Universal background checks, taking action on climate, protecting reproductive freedom. We know that these are things that Minnesotans wanted us to do, and we did the work that they sent us to do.
Leader Dameth indicated she wants more oversight, accountability into some of the programs that have already passed and the Walz administration. She cited Feeding Our Future. Is that something you're open to exploring more? Do you agree with her?
The challenge with the state legislature that we have in Minnesota is we are a part-time citizen legislature. We're here for 5 months and we pass a multi-billion-dollar budget. We, right now, don't have, barely have enough time to do a budget well together that looks deeply into all the things that we fund. If we wanted to do oversight, that is really probably hours and hours more work, and I'm not sure Minnesota really wants us to be a full-time legislature, but oversight is critically important. Now, one of the things we've done in recent years is have ombuds at these agencies, so you have an oversight function. We have definitely tightened up laws, working with Republicans, and then under Democratic control, continuing to try to tighten up the laws so that anybody who engages in fraud can more easily be detected and more forcefully punished. But certainly, we have to make sure that everything that state government does, that they do well and that, with absolute regard for the taxpayers' dollars. So I think it's a challenge, though, to think that the legislature could dive into the operations of each and every agency unless we change something about how it's set up.
Madam Speaker, I actually covered 3 ties in another state, and the key that I noticed was the relationship between the 2 leaders. If that was positive, professional, and friendly, it seemed to work out. I would have said before the end of last session that you and Representative David had such a relationship. Do you still, after the way the session ended?
We do. The question really is, do all the members, right? And so, we had kind of an unprecedented 3-week filibuster, 52 hours of debate on the final piece of legislation before we used an extraordinary measure that certainly wasn't our first choice. I think it's great if the leaders have a respectful relationship with each other. I think all of the members also have to have a respectful relationship with one another, treat each other with courtesy, and the respect for the institution and the norms that govern the institution. The institution can only function if people respect the norms that make it work.
Would you expect, if you do a rotating Speaker Pro Tem kind of situation, that you would have the Republican Speaker when Republican bills are on the floor and the Democrat Speaker when Democrat bills are on the floor? How would you work that?
Well, we can create a suggestion box and you can drop in all your different ways to do that. I think every single member of the legislature right now is probably brainstorming about the different ways that shared power could work.
Mine would be a rotating, like a lazy Susan, so you just rotate depending.
Months that end in Y.
Do you have a timeline? I mean, I know this is just the day after the election, but have you and Leader Dameth talked about a timeline for the 2 caucuses to meet, a timeline for figuring out? Because I think in '79 it was like after everybody was sworn in that they've reached the deal a couple days.
Right, they did negotiate those starting right away after the election. It was pretty nasty.
3 months to negotiate, so do you have a goal?
Apparently,
Yeah.
Joan Grow presided over the House for
Yes.
several days, so we're learning about this tidbit of history. Leader Dameth and I spoke earlier today, we talked about speaking together as soon as possible, as soon as the leadership issues are resolved in our respective caucuses.
Could you bring our Secretary of State in? He is a former member.
Well, he is designated by statute to start the session, and apparently, I haven't read the part of the statute that calls for him to keep presiding until we get a presiding officer, but hopefully we don't have to do that.
Have you talked to him?
I have not talked to him. Well, I talked to him last night about the way that results were reported, yes.
What would you say?
I just noted that there were some inaccuracies and that I don't believe that the data on the Secretary of State's website should change over the course of an evening. And I think we probably have bipartisan agreement on that there should be one and only one number reported as the results in a precinct.
What if Scott made a mistake and you don't want him to keep the bad results on his
A
site?
little checklist, well, anyway, yeah, that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm sure there'll be a bipartisan elections committee that will take a long look at that.
Are you interested in rolling back the deadline back earlier again? Because that was one of the issues last night apparently with the late results and the tallying was moving the absentee deadline drop off to 8 p.m.
Well, now you're getting into really elections committee work, and I think we'll let the elections folks look at that. But I think that, imagine you live in a mail-in precinct, and you discover that you have a ballot in your house at 4 PM on election day. Should you really not be able to drive somewhere and drop off your absentee ballot? Obviously, you can't vote in person anymore because same-day voting isn't happening. So we have to make sure that a person is entitled to vote throughout election day. So that, I think, was one of the reasons that.
In person on election day.
This is why
Yeah.
I shouldn't be doing elections committee work in this press conference.
We gotta figure if you talk to Governor Walz.
I have not talked to him yet. I have talked to Chris Schmitter, and, of course, we're very disappointed in the results of the election. We would have loved to have Governor Walz be our vice president, but I also think he's a pretty damn good governor, and I'm looking forward to working with him some more.
Do you think there's a new dynamic introduced by having a governor who has been a vice presidential candidate?
He's going to have great stories at the governor's residence breakfast.
What did I miss in the first 5 minutes, because you guys started early? Can you recap that?
No. I think I got an hour and a half of sleep, so do you remember what I said?
She said the coin landed on its side. I think the only thing I'll add, there were some questions about the election results, and I'll note that we did win more votes, our Democratic legislative candidates, than the Republicans did. We have a map that doesn't favor us in terms of the way it's drawn, but we had a lot of voters who sent us to represent them and sent our candidates to represent them because they were really good fits for their district. And so I think we overperformed a lot of expectations in a tough election for Democrats.
You said in 2022 that the map did favor you? You said in 2022 that the map did favor you because populations were growing denser in the suburbs.
Well, this is my point. So,
was.
well, I think it's, the proof is in the results from the election, right? Which is that we won more votes, but didn't win more seats. So I think that we have an alignment, which is just inherent in us being more concentrated in the metro, and that's true across the country.
The other thing I will say, though, is people think that Minnesota is this totally blue state, right? Because we have had Democratic governors since Tim Pawlenty left. But Minnesota is a very purple state. Remember when we had Senator Paul Wellstone and the weatherman from Channel 9? That guy. These elections are always pretty close. And so it's not surprising that Minnesota has very purple results and a really close divide.
Could you talk about the geography, and has that kind of now locked in and solidified that Democrats are not winning in northern Minnesota anymore, but doing better in the suburbs, still holding urban? Yeah.
We're still the only party that's representing the entire state. We are still have folks who are representing many greater Minnesota communities and who did win in greater Minnesota. But certainly when Donald Trump is on the ballot, we've seen the turnout in rural communities increase, and we've seen challenges for our candidates in those communities.
How will we watch your organization? Meaning, if you have a bunch of closed meetings with Damon, and your people have closed meetings with their people, do you just come out on January 13 and tell us all how it's gonna look, or is there something more transparent?
I think that we'll have a lot of conversations, and a lot of different members will have conversations. I'm not sure that the way that they did it in 1979 was a really functional way to do it. They had public meetings. What was that?
They were all men.
Yeah, well, I've got nothing to say about that. I think that Leader Damath and I have very constructive conversations, and I'm looking forward to working with her on this.